What's up, Mets fans? Welcome back to the channel, and we have a big discussion to be had here, folks, because we all know by now the Mets aren't done making moves once this lockout is lifted. They're still just getting started. They're going to continue to get the ball rolling to improve this roster for the upcoming season, and there's been a lot of speculation going around on how this infield is going to look for 2022 and beyond, and there's one player that sticks out that may very well find himself potentially landing in Queens and has more realism than maybe what the eye originally tells you. That, of course, is, yes, Trevor Story. So that's what I'll be breaking down in today's video. Everything that there is to know about Trevor Story, his game, his current connection, if at all, with the New York Mets, was the likelihood or unlikelihood of this transpiring, and so much more. So as always, folks, make sure you stay all the way till the end video for all the details and all my thoughts on Trevor Story and the potential he has in coming to the New York Mets. And again, folks, if you find yourself enjoying this kind of Mets content and you want to see more great Mets content like this, don't hesitate from smashing that like and subscribe button, sharing this video with your friends, on the notification bell, all those great things. Thank you all so much for the continued support, folks. Now let's jump right into today's video. All right, folks, let's start things off by clearing the air, because you probably clicked on this video and are wondering, Trevor Story, Mets second baseman. Story's been a shortstop his entire MLB career. Yes, he plays second and third base in the minors for the Rockies, but Jeff McNeil is also your starting second baseman. So how these things add up? You're absolutely right. It makes little to no sense for the Mets to pursue and eventually land Trevor Story when you have Jeff McNeil on this roster. And that is precisely why we're having this conversation today, folks, because all the rumors, all the speculation comes from a couple weeks ago from our good friend Pat Ragazzo, who came out with the initial report that we all know by now, that once the lockout is lifted, Jeff McNeil is probably going on the training block to hopefully address the rotation and add another bona fide starter in the middle of that rotation. So when you look at replacements, Ragazzo talked about Kris Bryant as a potential fit that I agree with wholeheartedly, but Kris Bryant is someone that is he going to be willing to go to a short-term deal? I don't know if he will, and I don't think the Mets want to go down a longer-term deal with someone like KB because they didn't with Javi Baez. Would things be any different now? I'm really not sure outside of his versatility. So Trevor Story is more of a short-term fit. Makes plenty sense. And this is the only realism behind it. And this is something that we also discussed, myself and Pat, in last night's live stream at the time of recording this, talking all things Mets, a plethora of topics, including Trevor Story and Kris Bryant. So if you want to find out some other information, make sure to check it out. Links in the description, as always, folks, if you haven't watched it already. But my point is, Trevor Story does not make sense for the Mets with Jeff McNeil here. It just simply isn't going to work. Because if you bring in Trevor Story, Jeff McNeil is someone that you could tell was a little disgruntled throughout the year for multiple reasons. And once he was pushed out of second base in the corner outfield, which is not his natural position once Javi Baez was traded for at the trade deadline, you could tell that there was some tension there, at least to a certain level. It doesn't make sense. So do not be under the belief, at least in my opinion, that the Mets would go down this route in this scenario where Jeff McNeil is not traded. So getting into now, why does Trevor Story actually make sense outside of being a Jeff McNeil replacement? Well, have the Mets shown any interest in Trevor Story in the past? Yes, they absolutely have. Going back to the MLB trade deadline from our good friend Michael Mayer, showing the receipts back in July, that yes, the Mets were heavily interested and very much in on Trevor Story. And of course, Michael Mayer covers the Mets, does a great job. Their Mets Mirage is unbelievably accurate, does a great job. But also, Trevor Story is someone that the Mets were really going in after, not just him, but also their starting pitcher in John Gray. But then the Rockies had an abrupt stop at the trade deadline and said, we're not going to trade either of them. We're just not going to do it. So then the Mets basically pivoted and went down the Javi Baez route because they knew that they couldn't land Kris Bryant either from the Cubs. So yes, simply put, the Mets have had plenty of heavy interest in Trevor Story just over this past year, or the past half year at least, right? And this is something where if the Rockies weren't stubborn in not wanting to trade him or John Gray last minute at the trade deadline, I very well could see at least Trevor Story on the New York Mets right now, and Mets even potentially sign him to a new deal as their long-term second baseman or whatever it may be. But this is also not Zach Scott and Sandy Alderson running the show anymore like it was then. We have Billy Epler, Steve Cohen, and everyone else involved really making these moves, and the player evaluation aspect has been different. But I also believe that's going to benefit Trevor Story in this situation, because the Mets have parted with plenty of players this offseason, all free agents, right? Guys that maybe haven't had the best locker room presence outside of being really strong players. It's more to that. It's more than just how you perform on the field, and that's what they're showing in player evaluation. And same thing goes with someone like Jeff McNeil, because the initial reports indicate that McNeil is someone who really hasn't gone over well with multiple players in that locker room. It's been known that he is by no means the favorite, especially after his ordeal with Francisco Lindor. So how much of a factor is that going to be in parting ways with him? We'll see. We'll find out. But Trevor Story's an interesting piece here as a 29-year-old free agent who's played shortstop his entire career, but has been been one of the best infielders in all baseball, both offensively and defensively at times. If you look at him this past season in 2021, in 142 games played, his walk year with the Rockies, had himself 24 bombs, 75 RBIs, 20 stolen bags, and 88 runs scored. You look at the 251, 329, 471 clip, and also looking at 100 WRC plus for someone with a 3.5 WAR. Throughout his entire career outside the shore in 2020 campaign, he has at least 24 bombs and 70 plus RBIs each and every season. His career best year offensively was in the years of 2018-2019, 35 plus bombs and 80 to 90 to 100 RBIs even during those spans. And really what stands out about him is not just his ability as a really strong offensive player, infielder who has basically more home runs than anyone else at the shortstop position for a couple of years now, but also has that ability to get the ball in play and also get on base a lot, which is why you look at the 2019 year, 111 runs scored, only 85 RBIs. This year, 88 runs scored, 75 RBIs, which tells you that he's gained on base a lot. He's putting himself in scoring position to have not just himself, but his team have success. And career-wise, the numbers speak for themselves. You're looking at just under 160 home runs before the age of 30 as a shortstop, 450 RBIs, 100 stolen bags, even guaranteed 15 to 20 stolen bags from Story every single year, a clip of 272, 340, 523, has continued to get the job done year in and year out and has been awfully balanced. And yes, I know he's dealt with some lows as of late in previous years, but it's still someone that you can come in for the Mets. And if they say want to go down a shorter term route with him, or maybe we'll even be willing to go down a longer term route possibly, because yes, they didn't do it with Javi Baez, but Trevor Story's a different player. It's a different circumstance. So this is someone that really could profile well in my mind and the minds of many at second base for the Mets for this win now stage, and also maybe a longer term stage should the Mets be that comfortable going down that route. Again, we're going to see exactly what they are going to prioritize once the lockout is lifted. But if, say, Jeff McNeil's not in the pitcher and Chris Bryant is no longer an option, Trevor Story at this spot makes oodles amount of sense. And now when you're getting into, okay, what is the situation with them? This is something that's another hurdle to get over because, yes, Trevor Story is someone that you have to give up a first-round pick for. Yes, the Mets have been awfully reluctant to do so. So are the Mets going to be willing to do that here with Trevor Story? That's a big question mark. Gut tells me they probably don't want to go down that route. But again, if they're left with a hole at second base, rest assured they know that they're parting ways with Jeff McNeil because they have an infield replacement, or they're nothing short of close to guaranteed on getting one done. If they have to go all in for Trevor Story, it makes sense. And maybe that even gives them more of a belief to go longer term with Trevor Story versus giving up your first round pick for just a one-year guy. Yes, they can go down that one-year route for sure because they have the most money in baseball. Shorter term, there's no one that can outbid the Mets. Simply put, for any player that they're really prioritizing, they showed it with Max Scherzer, and they will probably continue to do so either in this year's offseason or in the offseason going forward. Thank you so much, Stevie Cohen. Right, but Marcus Semien, last offseason, a great example. A guy that is a shortstop, but signed as a second baseman for Toronto, had a career year over 40 home runs, and got himself a contract over $170 million with the Texas Rangers. Trevor Story might be looking for a very similar spot here. They profile awfully similar when you're looking at these comparisons with how they went about the market. And if the lockout really drags on a while, players might have to sign shorter term deals. So that's where the appeal comes in, especially shorter term. There's really no better team out there than the Mets in a win now stage and have more money to throw than anyone else, simply put. But the biggest question of all, folks, can the Mets actually sway Trevor Story from either going to the Mets rival in the Phillies that have shown interest in Story pre-lockout, that would probably have him as their long-term shortstop fit, that would throw a long-term deal at him, or a team that probably makes the most sense here longer term, that being in the Houston Astros? Because if Houston loses Carlos Correa, which very well can happen, they have a gaping hole at shortstop for a team in a win now stage. And yes, Trevor Story is a Texas native. He's from a suburb in the Dallas area. He could keep his family there and potentially go on a long-term deal to Houston to ride out probably the majority of his career there and a win now stage still. So can the Mets, Steve Cohen, Billy Epler, Alex Cohen, Steve's wife, everyone else involved, do so great in swaying in the interview process that they did already in free agency with landing Max Scherzer, Starling Marte, and others, and potentially make him the highest paid second baseman in baseball, but on a shorter term deal? Is that enough to sway him? Is that enough for him to prioritize coming to the Mets? Potentially, but again, we're not going to know until something comes of this. So folks, I want to know all your thoughts in the comments below. How do you feel about Trevor Story being the Jeff McNeil replacement potentially, and a Jeff McNeil replacement potentially alone? Do you like that fit? Not like that fit? How realistic or unrealistic do you think it actually is, folks? And of course, if you found yourself enjoying this kind of Mets content and you want to see more great Mets content like this, don't hesitate from smashing that like and subscribe on, sharing this video with your friends, put on the notification bell, all those great things. Thank you all so much for the continued support, folks. Always means the world to me, and I'll talk to you soon. Let's go Mets, baby.